Why was the room so loud yet so empty? The laughter of young pilots filled the cavernous hall, a sharp metallic sound that didn't belong in a place built for discipline. It clung to the walls like static. They weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing at her. Anna Sharma stood quietly near the simulator hatch, her figure still, her hands clasped lightly behind her back. She wore a plain flight suit, no gaudy patches, no painted badges of ego. Her hair was drawn into a severe regulation bun, every strand tucked away as if the smallest detail mattered. She looked unremarkable to the crowd, forgettable even, and maybe that's why they underestimated her. Colonel Madsen had encouraged it. He prowled the front of the room like a man performing for an audience, his voice rising and falling with false authority. He was sharp in his uniform, polished boots, every crease a studied performance. But his eyes were restless, his tone dripping with something ugly. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said loudly enough for the back row to hear, "this isn't your dusty old Huey. This is the new Un-90 Reaper simulator, Neuralink avionics, neural feedback. It's not the kind of system your generation was trained to handle. Maybe you should just observe." The pilots laughed again, quick biting chuckles. They were half her age and in their minds twice her skill. Their laughter wasn't about humor. It was about belonging. They belonged here. She didn't. But Anna didn't react. Her eyes remained steady on the simulator. Her face was calm, expressionless. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't resignation. It was something deeper. That calmness was gasoline on Madsen's fire. He wanted her rattled. He wanted her small. And most of all, he wanted her silence to crack. From the back row, a different kind of silence stirred. General Wallace leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his weathered face shadowed by memory. He had fought in wars long before these cocky pilots had learned to walk. His eyes narrowed as he studied her. It wasn't age he saw, or gender, or rank. It was posture. It was stillness. The kind that came only from thousands of hours strapped into a seat where survival wasn't promised. The kind forged in fire and fear. He'd seen that stillness before in Afghanistan, in the cold cockpit of a Chinook pushing through tracer fire. It was the stance of someone who had already proven everything that mattered. And he thought, these children have no idea what they're looking at. Colonel Madsen paced in front of the massive wraparound screens like a showman about to unveil a trick. His words dripped arrogance. The Un-90 isn't just a helicopter, it's a network hub, a weapons system, a paradigm shift in rotary wing aviation, collective and cyclic tied into a haptic loop. It's about synergy, something your era of pilots can't really appreciate. The insult hung in the air like smoke, a poisoned dart. Some of the pilots smirked. Others looked at their boots, uneasy but unwilling to challenge him. Silence spread like a disease. Anna only nodded once, deliberate, slow. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady, unhurried. "Understood, sir." The words landed like stones in still water, flat, unemotional, the voice of someone reporting the weather. And that restraint enraged him more than any argument could have. He saw her calm as ignorance. He mistook her silence for weakness. He mistook her patience for defeat. "Good," he sneered, "because today we're running scenario 734, multiple cascading failures, a dual-engine flameout over mountains. No one has made it through. It's unrecoverable, purely for data. We don't expect anyone to survive it." He paused, savoring the cruelty. "But since you're here, why don't you give it a try? Show these young aviators what old grit looks like against new disaster." The room chuckled. A trap, a humiliation wrapped in procedure. But she didn't hesitate, didn't speak. She simply unclasped her hands, turned toward the simulator, walked. Her steps were measured, precise, not fast, not slow, intentional. She didn't look at him, didn't look at them. The air was thick with anticipation, with cruel hope, but she shut it all out. The door hissed closed behind her. Darkness swallowed her whole. For a moment there was only silence, the kind of silence she loved. No mocking voices, no pompous speeches, no audience waiting for failure. Just darkness, warm plastic, faint ozone, and the machine. Her fingers moved instinctively, touching switches she didn't need to see. Overhead panels, circuits, sequences, the familiar geography of survival. The cockpit bloomed to life, green light spilling across her face. Screens lit up. Power hummed through the skeleton of the machine. She breathed once, slow, deep. Then her hands rested, right hand on the cyclic, left on the collective. This was her sanctuary. The observation deck lit up as the big screen mirrored her view. Colonel Madsen raised his chin like a ringmaster calling the crowd. "All right, people, watch closely. These are her vitals." He pointed to the biometrics, heart rate, respiration, skin response. A pilot under this kind of stress will spike. Panic sets in. That's the data we're here for. The helicopter lifted from the ground, her touch impossibly smooth. She banked gently. It was as if the machine wasn't responding to her, it was flowing with her. Madsen frowned. "Introduce turbulence," he ordered. The screen darkened, clouds gathered, wind slammed against the machine, it shuddered violently. But in her hands the helicopter didn't resist, it flowed with the storm. She didn't fight the chaos, she danced with it. Madsen clenched his jaw. Not enough. Initiate scenario 734. Now. Alarms exploded in the cockpit. A symphony of panic. Red lights flashing. Warning voices shrieking. Engine 1 failure. Engine 2 failure. Hydraulics gone. Controls failing. The screen showed the nose of the Un-90 pitched downward, plunging toward jagged peaks. Around Madsen, the young pilots gasped. One whispered, "That's it, she's done." Madsen smirked. "And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, catastrophic failure, dead stick. It's impossible. Watch her heart rate." The numbers glowed steady. Heart rate 72, respiration calm. Madsen blinked. That can't be right. But inside, Anna Sharma wasn't panicking. She was working. The alarms became background noise. Her left hand slammed the collective down, flattening the pitch of the blades. The helicopter dropped faster, but that was the point. She wasn't fighting gravity. She was harnessing it. Altitude became rotor speed. The blades spun freely, faster, faster, storing energy. She wasn't flying the helicopter. She was flying the physics itself. Her hands, her feet, moved in tiny corrections, coaxing the dying machine into glide. No hesitation, no wasted motion, just precise, invisible control. The young pilots leaned forward. The helicopter, that should have been tumbling to its death, was gliding. Controlled, beautiful. "She's maintaining rotor RPM," one whispered, almost reverent. "Without engines, how?" The ground rushed up. A plateau barely large enough for the aircraft, her only chance. She waited, patient. Too patient, they thought. She's waiting too long. Then, at the last possible second, her hand pulled. The blades released their stored energy in one desperate flare. The descent stopped. The helicopter settled like a feather onto the rocky plateau. Perfect. Silence. The alarms cut off. The screen froze on the image of the intact helicopter, still safe. In the observation deck, you could hear the hum of the lights. Nothing else. No breath, no sound, only disbelief. Colonel Madsen's smug smile vanished. His mouth opened, nothing came out. His world, built on arrogance and noise, had collapsed under the weight of her silence. The hatch opened. Anna stepped out. Same face, same calm, no grin, no victory, just composure. And that silence, her silence, was louder than anything Madsen had said all morning. How long can silence last before it breaks a man? In the observation deck, silence was no longer empty. It was heavy, thick, almost suffocating. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. The impossible had just happened in front of them, and the woman who made it happen walked back into the room like she'd only tested a fire alarm. Colonel Madsen's jaw hung slack. His eyes darted to the biometric display, still glowing on the wall. 72 beats per minute. calm, steady, like someone taking a stroll rather than wrestling death. His throat worked to form words, but the air betrayed him. The same voice that had filled the room with arrogance an hour ago had nothing left. The heavy sound of boots cut through the stillness. General Wallace rose from the back row, every step deliberate. The younger pilots instinctively straightened, their spines stiff as the old soldier walked through them like a current parting water. He wasn't looking at Madsen. He wasn't looking at the stunned faces. He was looking only at her. Anna stood still as stone, her eyes unreadable. Wallace stopped at the console, his face carved with a kind of solemn weight. His voice carried low, calm, but each word fell like a hammer. "Sergeant," he ordered the technician, "pull up the unclassified service record for Chief Warrant Officer 4 Anna Sharma. Display it." The technician hesitated. Then his hands moved, nervous. A few keystrokes later, the simulator feed was gone, replaced by a stark file, plain black text on a glowing white screen. The crowd leaned forward. Wallace began to read. "Unit classification, Tier 1 Special Mission Unit." He paused. His eyes moved over the room, meeting each pilot's gaze one by one. "For those of you too green to understand, that means she belongs to an organization that doesn't exist. It means she flies where we don't admit we fly. It means she does things we'll never speak of." A ripple of murmurs passed through the room. The silence shifted, no longer disbelief, now reverence, tinged with unease. Wallace continued. "Flight hours, combat 7,842. The number dropped like a bomb. That's not training hours, that's not simulator time, that is combat, that is fire and blood and chaos in the real sky. That is more than every single one of you in this room combined, including me." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "You think you know pressure, you think you know fear. You don't, not yet, but she does." Some of the young pilots shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the weight of their earlier laughter suddenly unbearable. Wallace read on. "Decorations, Distinguished Flying Cross, 3 oak leaf clusters, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Air Medal, 24 Strike Awards." His voice tightened, then softened. "These are not decorations for showing up. Each one was earned when everything was burning, when the mission was collapsing, when lives were on the line. Each one means men and women went home because she was there." The file scrolled further. The final line froze the room. "Special qualifications, experimental test pilot, Rotary Wing Division, U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence, lead development pilot for Un-90 Reaper flight control and simulation software." Wallace's lips curved with the faintest trace of irony. "Scenario 734, catastrophic dual-engine failure. She designed it. She wrote the test. For everyone else it's impossible. For her, it's Tuesday." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking, undeniable. The screen went black, but the afterimage burned in every mind in the room. For the first time, Anna moved. Not much. Just a blink, just a shift of her gaze, but the silence followed her like a tide. And then, the most unthinkable moment of all. General Wallace turned to her, stiffened his uniform, and drew himself up to full height. Slowly, perfectly, he raised his hand. A salute, not casual, not routine. A salute of deep, unwavering respect. The crowd froze. A 2-star general saluting a warrant officer. "Ma'am," Wallace said, the word cracking like a rifle shot through the room. "My sincere apologies. That was the single finest display of airmanship I have ever witnessed, in simulation or in reality." Anna returned the salute, crisp, simple. Her voice was quiet, steady. "Thank you, General," 2 words, nothing more, enough. And then Wallace turned his eyes toward Madsen. The colonel's skin seemed to pale. He stood frozen, pinned under the weight of that stare. "Colonel Madsen," Wallace began. His voice dropped low, so low it carried sharper than a shout. "You are a commander on this base. Your duty is not to worship technology. It is to lead soldiers." He stepped closer. The room held its breath. And the first principle of leadership, Wallace continued, each word cutting clean, is that you judge your people by their competence, not by your own ignorant prejudice. Madsen swallowed, his chest heaved once. You assumed her age was weakness. You assumed her gender was limitation. You assumed her silence was ignorance. You were wrong on all counts. Wallace's eyes narrowed to slits. And that arrogance, Colonel, it is not just insulting. It is dangerous. It destroys trust. It gets people killed. The silence was a knife now, sharp and merciless. You are relieved of command, Wallace finished coldly. Effective immediately. Report to my office at 800. If you still have a career left, we'll discuss it then. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed like steel, final and absolute. Madsen lowered his eyes, his face drained of color. The pilot stared at him, at the man who just hours ago had commanded the room with arrogance, now stripped of everything. Anna didn't move. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her silence had already spoken louder than anything. By nightfall, the story had already left the simulator bay. It spread across the base like wildfire, not through reports or briefings, but whispers in the chow hall, murmurs in the barracks, conversations over beer at the NCO club. They said she didn't even break a sweat, one young lieutenant whispered. Heart rate stayed under 75. 75. Mine jumps that high when I'm just trying to park my car. Another shook his head. And she designed it. She wrote the scenario. Madsen thought he was setting a trap, but she built the trap, and then walked right out of it. At the maintenance hangar, a grizzled sergeant with grease on his hands told the story to his crew. He chuckled, shaking his head. Madsen strutted in there like he owned the world, thought he'd humiliate her, and the general stripped him so hard his ancestors felt it. That's the army for you. Two kinds of people you never underestimate, a soldier with nothing to lose, and a quiet warrant officer who's been flying longer than you've been alive. The legend wasn't official. It didn't need to be. It was alive. And in the middle of it all, Anna Sharma walked quietly down the flight line the next day. Not in a simulator, not under the glow of screens, but under the harsh sun where the real machines waited. She found a young crew chief fumbling his way through a pre-flight inspection on a Blackhawk. His hands shook with nerves, his eyes darting, afraid of getting it wrong. Anna stopped beside him. She didn't bark, she didn't lecture, she didn't remind him of who she was, she just watched, patient. Then she pointed gently to a hydraulic line. Check the torque stripe there, she said softly. See how it's misaligned, probably fine, but probably isn't good enough. Her words weren't a rebuke, they were a gift. The young crew chief nodded, adjusting, learning. She guided his hand, showed him the subtle vibration of a loose fitting, taught him how to see the invisible. Not a hero in a simulator, not a legend in whispers, just a mentor on a sun-baked flight line passing the standard forward. And in that quiet moment with no audience, her true strength was revealed again. Not in miracles, not in impossible landings, but in the patience to shape someone else's hands, someone else's eyes. The base could whisper all it wanted, the legend could grow, but for Anna Sharma it was always the same. The work, the standard, the silence. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What happens to a man when the uniform doesn't protect him anymore? Colonel Madsen sat in his office the next morning, the weight of Wallace's words still echoing. Relieved of command, effective immediately. He had worn that command like armor, and now it was stripped from him with a single sentence. The decorations on his chest meant nothing here. The polished boots, the perfect creases, the practiced confidence, all hollow. The phone on his desk rang. A clipped voice delivered the new assignment. Base logistics and inventory. The Dust Bowl, a cavernous warehouse where sunlight went to die, where boxes of boots and crates of rations gathered dust while sergeants made jokes about vanished supplies. Madsen's knuckles whitened around the receiver. Logistics, inventory, counting, not commanding, Not leading aviators or dazzling brass with charts and slides, just managing piles of government property. He wanted to argue, to resist. But Wallace's cold stare the day before had left no room. This wasn't a negotiation. It was exile. By that afternoon, his office was gone. The polished glass windows replaced with cinder block walls. The air-conditioned hum of his old command replaced with the rattle of overhead fans pushing hot, dusty air. His staff of young, eager officers replaced with supply sergeants who had long ago stopped caring, and privates who perfected the art of looking busy. He sat at a metal desk, surrounded by mismatched chairs and filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in years. On the desk, a computer monitor blinked with outdated software, demanding reconciliations he didn't understand. He clicked furiously, sweat beading at his temples, trying to bend the system to his will. It resisted, stubborn, like the machine itself was mocking him. He muttered curses under his breath, stabbing keys harder with every attempt. For the first time in years, his power meant nothing. "Sir," a hesitant voice cut through his frustration. He looked up. A young specialist stood there, barely 20. She looked nervous, but her eyes carried something he hadn't seen in weeks: competence. "You're trying to brute force the reconciliation, sir," she said softly. "The system won't let you. There's a sequence. You have to close out the sub-inventories first, then finalize the main manifest. Can I show you?" The old Madsen would have snapped. He would have barked at her for daring to correct him. He would have clung to rank like a lifeline. But Wallace's words gnawed at him still. "Judge your people by their competence, not your prejudice." He looked at the young woman again. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't condescending. She was offering help. He swallowed hard. The bitter taste of pride scraped his throat. Slowly, he pushed back from the desk. "Please, specialist, show me. I'm clearly not the expert here." The words felt foreign, strange. But when she smiled faintly and sat beside him, walking him patiently through the process, he felt something else: relief. The crushing weight of arrogance lifted, replaced by something new. Humility. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't cinematic. It was dusty, hot, unremarkable. But in that warehouse among crates and broken fans, Madsen began his real education. And while he wrestled with the lesson of humility, Anna Sharma kept moving quietly through the base, untouched by the noise her legend created. The whispers grew. The story spread faster than orders ever could. In the chow hall, two lieutenants replayed it in hushed tones. "She didn't even flinch," one said, shaking his head. "Colonel had her cornered and she just walked in like it was nothing, landed on a plateau the size of a postage stamp. Perfect." His friend leaned in. "And she wrote the scenario. That's the part everyone keeps forgetting. She built the trap." Madsen thought he was exposing her, but he was just a rat wandering the maze she designed. At the hangar, a master sergeant leaned against a fuel truck, telling his crew the tale. He laughed, shaking his head. Madsen strutted around like he was king of the base. Thought he'd humiliate her in front of everyone, and she didn't just survive it. She walked out calm as a morning breeze. "General dropped the hammer so hard, I swear the colonel's grandchildren are gonna feel it." The crew chuckled, passing the story down the line like a treasured relic. And slowly, the tale grew beyond fact. Someone printed a high-resolution screenshot from the simulation recording, the last frame. The U-90, perfectly settled on that impossibly small plateau, serene against the digital mountain storm. They pinned it to the main bulletin board in the operations building. Underneath, someone scrawled in neat block letters, the SHARMA standard. It became a touchstone, a reminder. Young pilots began to gather in front of it before their flights, tapping the corner of the printout like a ritual, a gesture of respect, a wish for composure. But Anna herself seemed indifferent to the legend forming around her. If she noticed the glances, the murmurs, the reverence, she gave no sign. Her focus remained where it always had been: the work. On the flight line, she moved quietly among the aircraft, mentoring without speeches, guiding without fanfare. She watched, listened, corrected with patience. One afternoon, she stood beside a young pilot fumbling through a systems check. His nerves betrayed him, his breathing shallow, his voice breaking as he read the checklist. Anna let him stumble for a moment. Then she spoke softly. "Stop, breathe, look again. You're not just reading a list. You're reading the machine, learn its language." The pilot paused, steadied himself, tried again. His hands were surer this time, his voice stronger. She didn't praise him, she didn't pat him on the back, she simply nodded once. Enough. Her teaching wasn't in words, it was in silence, in presence. Meanwhile, Madsen's exile continued. The warehouse was merciless. He spent his days reconciling numbers, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights, surrounded by sergeants who saw through rank like glass. But he was changing, slowly, painfully. He began asking questions, not barking orders but asking. The sergeants, at first suspicious, answered curtly. But as days turned into weeks, they began to notice something different. The arrogance was cracking. He stayed late, trying to understand systems he once dismissed as beneath him. He sweated through hours of inventory checks, working alongside privates who expected him to vanish after a day. He didn't. It was quiet, unglamorous redemption. Not in the simulator, not in the eyes of an audience, but in the dusty corners of forgotten supply lines. And though few noticed, Anna did. She passed through the warehouse one afternoon heading to a meeting when she saw him bent over a pallet of crates, clipboard in hand, his uniform smudged with dust. Not the polished colonel anymore, just a man doing the work. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge him beyond a faint, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. He held her gaze for just a second longer, then lowered his eyes back to the manifest. There was no forgiveness in her look, no condemnation either, just recognition. For him, that nod was heavier than any salute. Back on the flight line, Anna watched a helicopter lift into the sunset. The young pilot inside had once trembled under her scrutiny. Now his hands were steady, his voice calm. She exhaled quietly, the faintest hint of pride crossing her face. Not for herself, for him, for the standard. The legend of Scenario 734 grew larger with every retelling, but Anna Sharma never fed it. She didn't need to. The truth was powerful enough. Her silence kept speaking for her. And on a base where arrogance had once been currency, humility was becoming the new standard. Why do some stories die in silence, while others echo forever? 2 years passed. Bases rotated personnel, wars shifted in faraway deserts and jungles, and new recruits filed through the gates with the same mix of bravado and nerves as those before them. Time moved, but some things refused to fade. In the Advanced Flight Training Center, the simulator bay had changed. The screens were sharper now, the software upgraded, the graphics so realistic you could almost feel the cold air of the mountains pressing against your face. But one thing stood unmoved, a brass plaque bolted to the wall of the observation deck. It read, "The Sharma Auto Rotation." Beneath the words, a smaller line etched in steel, a lesson in calm professionalism. A new class of aviators, fresh-faced and restless, stood before it one morning. Their eyes darted between the plaque and the simulator door. Some smirked, whispering bravado to one another. Others shifted uneasily, sensing a weight in the room they didn't yet understand. Their instructor, a seasoned Chief Warrant Officer 3, stepped forward. His uniform was clean, but his face carried the lines of hard-earned experience. He had been a young lieutenant in that room the day Anna Sharma defied the impossible. He hadn't forgotten. He never would. He pointed to the plaque, his voice quiet but firm. "Before any of you step foot in that simulator, you need to understand this. Scenario 734. We don't call it that anymore. We call it the humility test." The room fell still. It was designed by Chief Warrant Officer 5 Anna Sharma, one of the founding mothers of the Night Stalker's advanced aviation program. The scenario is simple: catastrophic dual-engine failure, hydraulics gone, total loss, by every calculation unrecoverable. He let the silence stretch. Then his eyes swept over the faces in front of him. She built it to be impossible, and then she proved herself against it. The cadets shifted again. Some furrowed brows, others smirked nervously, dismissing it as an exaggeration. The instructor's gaze hardened. Make no mistake, she didn't just fly that machine, she flew herself. The lesson here isn't about technology, it's about what you bring into the cockpit when everything else is failing. The machine won't save you, your rank won't save you, your ego won't save you, only composure will. He walked to the plaque and placed his hand against it. The brass gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Remember this," he said softly. "Respect isn't about the insignia on your chest or the noise you make in a briefing room. Respect is earned in silence when everything goes wrong and people are watching. This plaque isn't about a simulator. It's about a standard." The cadets stood quietly now, no more smirks, no more whispers. The weight of the story pressed on them. The instructor gestured to the simulator door. "Scenario 734 is waiting. Some of you will panic. Some of you will fail. And that's the point. The humility test isn't about landing the helicopter. It's about discovering who you are when you can't." The first cadet stepped forward, pale but determined. The others watched. The ritual had begun. And just like that, Anna Sharma's impossible act had transcended her. It was no longer just a memory, no longer whispers in chow halls or hangars. It was institutional. It was carved into brass, passed down in tradition, embedded into the DNA of a generation of aviators. Anna herself never stood before the plaque. She didn't need to. She already knew the lesson it carried. Instead, she walked the flight line at dusk, her boots crunching on gravel, her eyes scanning every detail: fuel lines, blade tips, crew movements. She wasn't looking for mistakes. She was watching for the things people missed. The torque stripe out of place. The nervous hand fumbling a checklist. The rookie who looked confident until silence fell and his breathing betrayed him. Her gift wasn't just flying, it was seeing. One evening, she stopped beside a Blackhawk as the last rays of sun lit the tarmac in gold. A young crew chief struggled with a stubborn panel, sweat running down his neck. He pulled, cursed under his breath, tried again. Anna crouched beside him. "Stop forcing it," she said quietly. The young man froze, startled by her presence. "Listen," she said, placing a hand against the panel. "Feel the vibration. It's telling you something. Machines speak. You just have to learn to listen." He touched the panel, felt the faint tremor she meant. His brow furrowed. "It's misaligned." She nodded once. "Good." No lecture, no speech, just enough. He fixed the problem, steadier now. She stood, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. Behind her, two pilots watched. They whispered to each other when she was gone. "That's her, isn't it? The one from the plaque." The other nodded, reverent. "Yeah, that's her." Her legend had grown beyond her control, but she never chased it. Meanwhile, in the Dust Bowl warehouse, Colonel Madsen's penance continued. He walked the aisles of stacked crates, clipboard in hand, sweat streaking his shirt. The man who once sneered at others now listened quietly as sergeants explained inventory systems, as privates pointed out shortcuts to avoid reconciliation errors. He learned to swallow his pride daily, each gulp bitter but cleansing. One sweltering afternoon, a private approached him. "Sir, we've got a shortage in the manifest. You want me to fudge it like before?" Madsen froze. The old version of himself would have approved, would have rewarded the corner cut, the illusion of efficiency. But not now. "No," he said quietly. "We fix it, we do it right." The private blinked, surprised, then nodded. It wasn't redemption in glory. It was redemption in dust, in sweat, in the humility of learning to be human again. And though no one wrote plaques for him, no one whispered legends about him, it mattered all the same. Because the real test of character isn't what you do in front of a crowd. It's what you do in the quiet, when no one is watching. The base changed with time. Young pilots came and went. Missions shifted. But one thing remained constant, the story of Anna Sharma and the impossible landing. It was told again and again, not as myth but as a lesson, a reminder that arrogance kills and humility saves. And for those who never met her, the plaque was enough, brass and words, a story carved in metal. But for those who did meet her, who felt her presence on the line or heard her quiet corrections, the lesson was even deeper. It wasn't just about what she had done once. It was about who she was every day. Quiet, professional, steady. A reminder that sometimes the strongest voice in the room is silence. Why do some people change a room without saying a word? By the third year after the plaque was mounted, something subtle had shifted across the base. It wasn't in the official manuals. It wasn't in the daily briefings. But you could feel it in the way people carried themselves, in the pauses before a careless joke, in the silence that lingered a second longer when someone underestimated another. The story of the Sharma auto rotation wasn't just a tale told over beers anymore. It was part of the air, breathed in by every new class, etched into every young officer's training. The brass plaque on the simulator wall had become a point of pilgrimage. Before taking the humility test, pilots would stop in front of it, some brushing their fingertips against the cool metal, others bowing their heads slightly, as though the plaque itself demanded reverence. But the plaque wasn't the real force. The real force was still walking the flight line. Anna Sharma remained the quiet constant. She carried herself without grandeur, without the weight of her legend. To her, the work never changed. The torque stripe was still the torque stripe. The checklist was still the checklist. A nervous hand still needed guiding. She never acted like someone special, and that more than anything made her unforgettable. One morning, she found herself standing behind a new flight instructor who was berating a cadet for a clumsy maneuver in the simulator. The instructor's voice was sharp, slicing into the young man's pride. The cadet's hands shook as he fumbled through the controls. Anna said nothing at first. She simply stepped forward, placed a hand gently on the instructor's shoulder, and shook her head once. The instructor faltered, confused, but fell silent. She leaned over the cadet's chair. Her voice was low, calm, even. "Breathe, reset. This isn't about the mistake, it's about how you respond to it." The cadet inhaled shakily, adjusted his grip and steadied his breathing. His hands grew more certain. The helicopter leveled. Anna didn't smile, didn't praise him. She only said, "Better." The cadet nodded, his eyes shining not with triumph but with understanding. He wouldn't forget that moment. Afterward, the instructor approached her quietly. "Ma'am, I didn't realize I was pushing him too hard." Anna met his eyes for only a second. "We don't break them here, we build them." That was all. But that single line spread as quickly as her impossible landing once had. "We don't break them here, we build them." Instructors repeated it. Students whispered it. It became a quiet code, reshaping the culture from harshness to resilience, from arrogance to patience. And all the while, Anna kept walking, teaching, correcting, with the same quiet presence that had once stunned a room into silence. In the Dust Bowl, Colonel Madsen's exile was grinding him down in ways he hadn't expected. At first, the monotony was torture, reconciling manifests, chasing numbers, sweating under broken fans while privates snickered behind his back. But over time, he discovered something unexpected. The warehouse didn't lie. The numbers were what they were. The work either got done or it didn't. And for the first time in years, his rank didn't shield him from failure. He started to change in small ways. He learned to listen, to admit when he didn't know, to ask for guidance from people he once dismissed. Slowly, grudgingly, he began to understand that leadership wasn't about command. It was about trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the dust bowl baked in red light, a young private approached him with hesitation. "Sir," she said, holding a clipboard, "we're short 3 pallets of MREs. I think the manifest's wrong, but I might have logged them under the wrong code. I can fix it before anyone notices." Madsen looked at her. Her face carried the same nervous energy he had once mocked in others. The easy answer was there: let her fix it quietly, make the problem disappear. But Wallace's words lived in him now. Prejudice breaks trust. Arrogance gets people killed. He shook his head. "No, leave it, we'll report it, then we'll fix it. Mistakes happen. What matters is that we're honest about them." The private blinked. Relief softened her shoulders. She nodded. "Yes, sir." For the first time in his career, Madsen realized he wasn't protecting his pride. He was protecting her trust. And he thought of Anna Sharma, her calm, her silence, the way she had walked past him once in the warehouse, giving him only a small, quiet nod. He had lived off that nod for months. In some strange way, her silence was teaching him still. The legend of Anna Sharma grew, but she didn't feed it. She never stood before the plaque, never gave speeches, never allowed herself to be put on a pedestal. She walked the line. She touched the machines. She spoke only when needed. But the people around her changed. A young captain who once boasted loudly in the mess hall now found himself mentoring a rookie quietly, repeating Anna's words. "We don't break them here. We build them." A squadron commander known for tearing into pilots after failed missions paused one afternoon, looked at his people, and chose silence instead. He thought of Anna's still face, her calm eyes. He decided silence could speak louder than anger. Even Wallace noticed. He didn't comment often, but once, while watching a group of cadets file into the simulator bay, he muttered under his breath, "She's changing the whole damn place." And he was right. One night, years after her impossible landing, Anna stood alone on the tarmac. The stars hung heavy above, the night air filled with the distant thrum of engines. She watched as a new generation of helicopters lifted into the dark, their rotors cutting the sky like blades of shadow. Her hair was streaked with silver now. Time had left its marks, but her eyes were the same, calm, focused, missing nothing. She watched one pilot in particular, a young woman with nervous hands guiding her machine into the air. The lift wasn't perfect, the control a little shaky, but Anna's eyes softened. She remembered. She had been that nervous once too. The helicopter rose into the night, steadying, finding its rhythm. Anna nodded once, a silent blessing. She didn't wave, didn't call out. She just stood in the shadows, watching the future take flight. And as the machine disappeared into the stars, she whispered, not for anyone else to hear, but for herself, "This is enough." Why do some moments vanish like smoke, while others calcify into stone? Years passed, wars came and went. Bases changed hands, technologies evolved, but the story of Anna Sharma did not fade. It grew roots. It wove itself into the culture, into the unspoken code of every aviator who stepped into the simulator bay. By now, no one called it Scenario 734 anymore. To say the number aloud was almost archaic. Among the instructors and cadets alike, it had only one name: the humility test. Each new class faced it. Each fresh pilot walked into the simulator knowing the odds were impossible. They still tried, because to fail the humility test wasn't a mark of shame. It was the rite of passage. It was the reminder that even the most skilled hands could not always bend physics, that arrogance shattered faster than glass under pressure. And above the simulator door, the brass plaque gleamed, the Sharma auto rotation, a lesson in calm professionalism. No one who stood before it asked if the story was true anymore. They didn't need to. Truth had been absorbed into tradition. But Anna herself stayed away from the plaque. She had never once been seen standing before it, never allowed herself to bask in its glow. She knew too well the danger of myth. She had lived the reality. The airframe had plummeted, the alarms had screamed, and her calm hands had worked not for applause, not for legend, but because lives had always depended on composure. And yet, whether she wanted it or not, her silence had become louder than anyone's speeches. On the base, people spoke of her differently now, not just as the woman who had beaten the impossible, but as a living reminder of what professionalism meant. Young instructors borrowed her words, "We don't break them here, we build them." Sergeants on the flight line passed her quiet teachings like inheritance. Listen to the machine. Learn its language. Commanders invoked her example in their briefings. Respect isn't in rank, it's in composure. Her presence lingered even when she wasn't in the room. Meanwhile, in the Dust Bowl, Colonel Madsen's redemption had taken on a rhythm of its own. His new life was stripped of glory, but it carried a strange satisfaction. He worked alongside specialists and privates, learning the quirks of supply chains, the fragile dance of logistics. He was no longer a commander of cocky pilots. He was just a man learning patience in the desert of forgotten inventory. One day, years after his demotion, he stood in front of a group of new warehouse staff. They were young, disinterested, muttering complaints under their breath. Madsen saw his old self in them, arrogant, dismissive, blind. He cleared his throat. "You think this job doesn't matter. You think this warehouse is beneath you. You're wrong. Every screw you misplace, every crate you mislabel, that's someone out there waiting for a part that never comes. That's a machine grounded. That's a mission compromised. This matters." The room fell quiet. His voice wasn't booming anymore. It wasn't laced with superiority. It was steady, firm. The sergeants nodded, recognizing the change in him. They saw the truth. And though he never said her name aloud, Madsen knew exactly whose shadow had shaped him. He carried Anna's silence with him like a compass. Back in the simulator bay, another class faced the humility test. A nervous cadet gripped the controls, sweat pouring down his temples as alarms screamed in his ears. He fought the machine, overcorrected, panicked. The helicopter spiraled. The crash screen lit up red. The cadet slumped in defeat, pulling off his headset, his breath ragged. He expected ridicule. He braced for it. But instead, his instructor said softly, "Remember what Sharma showed us. This test isn't about saving the helicopter. It's about saving yourself. Breathe, reset. You'll try again." The cadet looked up confused. No mockery, no shame, just calm. And slowly he nodded. That was Anna's legacy in motion. Not the landing itself, but the culture that grew around it. The refusal to humiliate, the commitment to build. The belief that resilience mattered more than ego. One evening, Anna stood alone again at the edge of the tarmac, watching a new generation lift into the night sky. The aircraft were sleeker now, quieter, their systems more advanced than anything she had once flown. Technology had leapt forward, but the fundamentals hadn't changed. The machine still obeyed physics. The pilot still obeyed composure. She watched a Black Hawk rise smoothly, its rotor blades slicing the dusk. At the controls was a pilot she had once corrected, years ago, for overlooking a torque stripe. Now his hands were steady, his eyes focused. She watched him disappear into the horizon, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. A mechanic nearby, wiping grease from his hands, caught sight of her. "Ma'am," he said, his tone respectful but curious, "do you ever get tired of it, carrying the weight of being a legend?" Anna turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I don't carry it," she said softly. "They do, I just do the work." The mechanic blinked, then nodded slowly. He understood, even if he couldn't explain why. Legends weren't meant to be worn. They were meant to be lived through others. Instructors kept telling the story of the impossible landing. Cadets kept failing the humility test. Madsen kept grinding in the Dust Bowl, finding his way back to humanity through humility. And Anna, she kept walking, silent, calm, focused. Her silver hair glinted under the floodlights, her eyes steady as ever. She knew the truth Wallace had seen long before the plaque was mounted. Legacies aren't carved in brass, they are carved in people. And hers was still being written. One silent nod, one patient correction, one impossible standard at a time. When does a soldier know it's time to step back? Anna Sharma stood at the edge of the runway at dusk, the air humming with the low vibration of spinning rotors. The machines had changed sleeker, more efficient, bristling with technology she hadn't trained on in her earliest days. Yet when she looked at them, she didn't see new parts or new systems. She saw the same truth she had always seen: physics and discipline, lift and balance, calm and chaos. Her hair carried streaks of silver now, faint but undeniable. The lines at the corners of her eyes had deepened, carved not by weakness but by years of steady focus. Younger pilots still greeted her with reverence, some with awe, some with nervousness. But she noticed the shift. They weren't seeing her as another aviator anymore. They were seeing her as something else, a standard, a reminder of what they were chasing. And quietly, she wondered what it meant to live as a standard when you were still human. That evening, she walked into the hangar where a group of cadets sat in a circle, heads bowed in frustration. They had just come from the simulator bay, and the humility test had torn them apart. None had landed. Some had panicked. A few had stormed out in silence, their pride bruised beyond repair. Anna didn't announce herself. She simply sat down on a crate nearby, her presence unnoticed at first. She watched as one cadet, a young woman with sharp features and trembling hands, finally broke the silence. "What's the point?" she asked bitterly. "If it's impossible, then why even try? Why put us through this?" No one answered. They were all thinking the same thing. Anna leaned forward, her voice steady, almost gentle. "Because failure is a mirror. It shows you who you are." The cadets turned, startled to see her sitting there. Their eyes widened. Whispers rippled through the group. Anna continued, "You think it's about the machine, about the landing. It is. It's about you, about how you breathe when the alarms scream, about whether you freeze or panic or find stillness." She paused, her eyes sweeping over them. "The test doesn't ask if you can save the helicopter. It asks if you can save yourself." The cadets stared at her, their earlier anger cooling into something else. The young woman who had spoken clenched her fists. "And you beat it, didn't you?" Anna held her gaze. Her voice dropped, quiet, almost conspiratorial. "Once, but I've failed plenty of other times. Don't mistake a single landing for a perfect life." The honesty hit them harder than any speech. She wasn't a myth in this moment. She was flesh and blood, a professional who carried scars they couldn't see. And for the first time that evening, the cadets breathed easier. Later that night, as the hangar emptied, one of the instructors approached her. He was young but already hardened by deployments. "Ma'am, they look at you like you're untouchable." Anna shook her head. "Then I've failed them. If they think I'm untouchable, they'll never learn what matters. I'm not a ghost. I'm just a pilot who did her job. What matters is that they believe they can carry it too." Her voice was calm, but inside a knot twisted. She didn't want to be a statue, a plaque, or a story. She wanted to be a guide, a teacher, a reminder that strength wasn't perfection but composure in imperfection. Meanwhile, Colonel Madson's slow redemption had reached its final turn. Years of exile in the Dust Bowl had stripped away everything false. He no longer wore arrogance like armor. He no longer chased command. He had learned the hard way that respect couldn't be demanded. One afternoon, he was summoned to General Wallace's office. He expected another reprimand, another reminder of his failures. Instead, Wallace studied him for a long moment, then said simply, "You've learned something, Colonel. Finally." Madsen shifted uncomfortably. "I've learned how little I knew." Wallace nodded once. "Then maybe you're worth keeping." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't triumph. But it was enough. Madsen walked out of that office with no illusion of glory. He would never command elite pilots again. But he could live with that. because he understood something now he had never grasped before. Humility was the only rank that mattered. Back on the tarmac, Anna watched another training cycle finish. She saw the cadets line up, their faces flushed with exhaustion and determination. She saw the instructors correct gently instead of tearing down. She saw camaraderie where arrogance used to thrive. And she realized something. Her time in the cockpit was fatting. She no longer needed to prove herself in simulators or missions. Her legacy wasn't in the flight hours logged or the medals pinned. It was here, in the culture that had shifted, in the quiet ripple of composure that flowed through the new generation. That evening she walked past the simulator bay. A small group of cadets stood in front of the plaque, their faces serious as they read the words again. The Sharma auto-rotation, a lesson in calm professionalism. They didn't notice her standing in the shadows, watching. She didn't step forward. She didn't correct them. She didn't remind them she was the woman behind the words. She let the plaque speak for itself. And as she turned to leave, she felt something ease inside her. She no longer needed to hold the legend. It belonged to them now. The next day, a young instructor approached her on the line. His voice carried hesitation but also respect. "Ma'am, the cadets, they look at you like you're more than human. I don't know how to teach them to see you as real." Anna's answer was simple. Show them your flaws. Show them how you fail and how you stand back up. That's what makes you real. The instructor nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Anna walked away, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. She knew she was approaching the twilight of her career. The machines would soon belong to hands steadier than hers, younger, sharper. But her work wasn't finished. Her work was never the machine. It was always the people. That night, she stood again at the edge of the runway, the darkness broken only by the red beacons of helicopters lifting into the stars. She felt the vibration in her chest, the deep thrum of engines carrying another generation into danger, into uncertainty. She didn't pray, she didn't speak. She only nodded once, a silent benediction to every pilot who carried her standard without even knowing it. And in that silence, she realized something profound. Legacies aren't about being remembered. They're about leaving behind something worth living by. Her silence had done that. And in the still night air, she finally allowed herself the faintest whisper. It's enough. What does it mean to leave? To walk away from the only world you've ever known? Anna Sharma stood in front of her locker for the last time. The metal door was scratched, dented, paint worn thin by years of use. She opened it slowly, her hands moving without urgency as though each motion was a ritual. Inside were the relics of decades, a worn helmet bag, a stack of manuals annotated in tight, precise handwriting, a flight glove with the stitching frayed at the thumb. No medals, no pictures. She had never kept those things close. She lifted the glove once more, feeling the texture of leather against her palm. Then she set it back down. The base buzzed outside, cadets running drills, rotors spooling up, instructors barking orders softened now with patience. The rhythms of a place that would continue long after she left. She walked the line one last time. The helicopters gleamed under the afternoon sun, blades catching light as though each were a shard of sky. Young pilots moved among them, confident, purposeful. They noticed her, some nodding, some freezing in reverence, but she gave no speeches, no farewells. She only observed. She had taught them everything she could. The rest was theirs now. At the simulator bay, the plaque waited, brass polished, words engraved, the Sharma auto-rotation. A lesson in calm professionalism. A group of cadets stood before it, whispering, glancing nervously at the simulator door. The humility test awaited them. Anna didn't approach. She didn't step into their circle or correct their posture. She simply lingered in the shadows, watching their faces. The nervous one biting his lip, the proud one masking fear with arrogance, the quiet one holding her breath. They didn't see her, they didn't need to. The plaque spoke for her. Later she walked through the Dust Bowl warehouse one final time. Madsen was there, hunched over a manifest, his sleeves rolled, sweat marking his collar. He looked up, surprised to see her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Anna nodded once, the same silent acknowledgement she had given him years before, but this time his lips curved into a small, humble smile. He returned the nod. No words, none were needed. Her boots carried her back to the flight line as the sun dropped low, painting the sky in amber and crimson. She paused at the edge of the tarmac, her silhouette framed against the glow. A new generation of helicopters stood ready, blades whispering promises of missions yet to come. She didn't climb into one. That wasn't her place anymore. Instead, she waited. And soon the young pilots came, walking with the kind of energy only youth carries. Their eyes found her, each one pausing, unsure if they should salute, if they should speak. Anna gave them the gift of simplicity. She raised her chin, her eyes steady, and said only this: "Do the work, be calm, that's all." They nodded, their expressions shifting, the weight of her words heavier than any lecture. And then she stepped back, letting them pass, letting them climb into the machine she had once commanded with her own hands. The engines roared, rotors slicing the evening sky. The helicopters lifted, shadows against the fire of sunset, rising into the dark. She watched them go, her arms at her sides, her face unreadable but her heart quiet. When the last one disappeared into the horizon, Anna exhaled slowly. Her time was over. But her legacy, it was only beginning. Because she had left behind something more enduring than records or medals or even plaques. She had left a culture, a standard, a living inheritance written into the way these pilots breathed under pressure, the way they guided nervous hands, the way they chose silence over arrogance. Years from now, when her name was just a story whispered in classrooms and chow halls, the lessons would remain. A lieutenant faced with a crisis would remember to steady his breathing. A crew chief spotting a subtle misalignment would recall her quiet correction. A commander tempted to humiliate would choose instead to build. Her silence would still speak. And though Anna Sharma's figure grew smaller on the flight line that night, fading into shadows as the base continued to hum with life, her presence remained. In every checklist, in every calm breath, in every impossible moment faced with steady hands. That was her true victory. Not the impossible landing, not the plaque, not even the legend. It was this, the quiet revolution of character. The truth that strength doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it doesn't humiliate, it endures, patient, composed, silent. And so the final words of her story aren't hers at all. They are whispered every day by those who carry her standard without knowing the source. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.